Hi everybody, thank you for checking in on this video. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of how I sandblasted my motor. I have various videos kind of showing the different steps, starting with when it was quite rusty with a lot of the components off of the motor, and then kind of progressing through each day, the sandblasting that I got done, and as that progressed, and then yes, I would have cleaned the motor before painting. Then I would have primed it and painted it. What I used for the painting is somewhat of like, I guess it would be called like an engine enamel from an automotive store. So a little bit high temperature. I did use some special high temperature stove paint on the actual turbo because that is one of the most difficult things to keep paint on. I did overspray after I painted the stovepipe paint. I did overspray it a little bit with the engine enamel. We'll see how that lasts, but underneath that cosmetic top coat, there is the stove paint, which I'm hoping will remain in place. So some of the stuff that I would have used, first of all, safety. These are the goggles I would have used. Even with them kind of molding to your face, sandblasting goes everywhere and it is brutal. I would recommend something even better than this. You can kind of see that in the end, it's so blasted up. It's kind of like having to weld with an old style welding helmet where you're kind of working blind. Most of the time I would have wore, I love thin little gloves. I used this here mask. So you want to have good filter. Some of the larger particle blasting media that I used would not have created much dust, but some of the finer stuff definitely kind of explodes and goes into a bit of dust. So yeah, this thing got used like crazy. I'm not as young as I once was. I love knee pads for going up and down. Now, just to kind of talk about some of the media I used, I just went to like a Tractor Supply close by, and I would have bought Black Diamond product is coal slag. When you're working on a motor, I believe using like, maybe like walnut shells, something like that is good to use because any little components of that get into your orifices of the motor can kind of disintegrate. So I had to be very careful plugging up all the holes on the engine to make sure that I did not have any coal slag going in. But that is a risky risk that I took. And I like to gamble. Here's the other. So what it is I got like a medium grit and a fine grit abrasive. Let's see here. Not sure where it says on the bag, but one is medium grit, one is fine grit. Also, I use this right here to kind of hose down the motor after I had blasted everything. The process was, it did take me, I worked at blasting the actual engine block for 3 days. It was a pretty big project because I used a pretty small sandblaster, just do-it-yourself style. And so when on the last day, I kind of just lightly blasted over the whole motor again, and just to kind of give it a little bit of a fresh, because you ideally you want to blast your motor and then paint it quickly. So the last day I blasted over it. I used acetone to hose it down, make sure to get it nice and clean. Also, when I was doing the actual sandblasting, this is the tool that I used, just a $50, $70 tool. And so you're filling the hopper all the time. There again, much nicer if you can get a much larger setup, but that is what I used and I don't regret it. Worked out good. Again, here's the motor in the state it's at right now, ready to receive a lot of the engine accessory components, diesel, the mechanical diesel pump here, and then you have a manual pump up here, all the hoses and diesel, high pressure diesel fuel lines, all that stuff I'm still needing to put on. I made this here shelter to try to take care of my friend's shop that he so kindly let me use. It has an overhead crane, which is what we use to remove the motor out of the boat and put it back in. And it just made so much safer and effortless as far as from a lifting standpoint. Okay, so what I found is the fine media worked really good when you had like deep little grooves and stuff. It would kind of polish things up. And the heavier medium grit media would was a little bit more powerful and could break through heavy rust. So while I was working with all the accessory components and getting that stuff blasted and painted before I moved to the big project, which was the actual main engine, I was kind of experimenting. This is really my first project to be sandblasting. I've never done that in my life. And what I found is the fine worked good in situations and the medium worked better in other situations. So I actually wound up in the end combining the two in a mixture. And I really, really like that because inevitably you got some heavy rust you're wanting to break through. The heavier grit did that. But there again, especially with some of the rougher, coarser surfaces like cast iron can be a lot of times, the fine grit would kind of get in and around all the little nooks and crannies of the surface of the metal and kind of polish it up a little bit easier, I thought. So I wound up with a mixture. This is what I used this media possibly 10, 20, 30 times. And this right here is kind of how it looked in the end. So it all wound up getting fairly fine, but you can still see the some of the really dark stuff is that medium grit that is still not broken down. So yeah, it worked great. I was very happy with it. Like I say, you do run a little risk using coal slag on a motor if you have any open orifices and places where it could go into the motor. That would be very detrimental to the engine. So throughout the process, before I would reuse the media, I was using like a juice strainer from my wife that was getting rusty anyway. And so I repurposed it to get all the paint and rust particles. This right here is a little bit how it looked like after I was done straining it. And I would just keep throwing that stuff in a separate thing to not plug up my sandblast gun. So that worked out really well. Like I say, it's a little time consuming. This was definitely labor intensive project, but I want to say that like my media was in the $20 to $30 range per bag. I think my sandblaster was $70. The filter mask, those are not very cheap. I think they're at least 20, 30 bucks. Would highly recommend spending a lot more on some sort of a face shield. I know some face shields that they make actually have panels that you can kind of keep removing. That would be very nice. But yeah, when you're blasting, things are going everywhere. I kind of used more of like skin tight clothing and stuff, but you still wind up with coal slag everywhere. And it's a bit of a cleanup project. I often use like a stocking cap or whatever you want to call it over my head to try to keep it out of my hair as much as possible. And like slip-on shoes that I tried to use long pants so that they wouldn't fill up too fast with coal slag either. But yeah, it goes everywhere. Highly recommend using some sort of a structure to contain it all. And then you can just keep scooping up the stuff and reusing it. On my engine components, I did use a worn out tent at home in my own shop and set that up. And that worked great as a much smaller booth to work in, but that was going to be too small. The tent was just like your typical 3 or 4 person tent, too small to do the engine. And so I wanted to build something that I could stand up in and work in a little bit more comfortably and try to not make too big of a mess in my friend's shop. So today we hope to kind of clean up our mess a little bit and yeah, so that we don't strain our relationships.
Everything's dusty.
Yeah. things got covered in a layer of dust and stuff, so we want to kind of blow off some of these boxes. Our friend has a garage door business, and so we want to kind of clean up and not leave too big of a mess. And here is the motor I am repainting. So you can see, looking down at the motor, maybe it doesn't look too bad, but you get a little bit closer look at it, and various items are very corroded from salt spray. So one concern was about the oil pan, but I think that might be an aluminum one. And so there is actually, I can't see really any corrosion other than bolts. Mostly it's that engine block, which obviously would take an enormous amount of corrosion to get through that. However, things like the accessories, things like that, is not so funny when that gets all corroded up. Okay, just want to do a little update. A lot of the top third of the motor is now blasted. Quite a bit of the components are aluminum or brass, so anyway, still need to go down the engine further, but even the engine block where I've hit it a little bit does clean up, but I haven't really hit the actual cast iron engine block quite yet, but worked on the turbo and a lot of these upper components. Okay, here's a little update on how the sandblasting is going after one day. I've come around the engine about to this point here, and you can kind of see the difference where I have not went yet. I don't have the engine all blown off, but basically the top third is pretty much done. Need to do the bottom 2/3 on this side here, and a lot of this up here is done. This whole end here, most of the end needs finished. So I am hoping that day 2 will have the engine blasted. Pretty happy with how things are going here. But yeah, it is a fair amount of work to get into all the nooks and crannies. Here's another update on the progress. There's just a couple little spots that I want to try to hit and get cleaned up just a little bit better. But overall, I'm getting pretty happy with the state of how clean it is. Alright, we've got our final coat of paint on, a couple of coats, and this is not the original Yanmar gray. I chose to go with a slightly lighter color, and this is like, I believe, like an aluminum bright color of paint, metallic aluminum color, and I think it will show dirt and oil and stuff maybe just a little bit better, and it was also what was readily available that I could use, so I went with that. Pretty happy with the results. Here's a little update on what I got done today. Got a few of the hoses on, a few of the brackets that hold the motor mount, and the air intake, and a new fuel filter, new oil filter. Got the transmission oil drained, and getting ready to proceed through the preparation for getting the alternator and starter installed and the electrical harness next.